Good morning, everyone. We're talking with Terry Miles again from the Intrato Corporation about the Intrato Way. How do they deliver business transformation? And so once again, we're joined by Terry. Terry, thanks for coming on again.
Absolutely, Tony. Thank you for the time.
Yeah. For those who haven't seen, Terry, can you give us a quick rundown on what Intrato is up to and how we can contextualize all of this?
Sure. Intrato is a PCF customer. We're about 2 years into our journey, and it comes in the context of various reforms. We're adopting PCF as part of a platform as a service, platform consolidation effort. Concurrent to that, there's also an enterprise CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment initiative, and related procedural data layer reforms around that. Our company's history is we were a holding company, so we were particularly decentralized in that way. We let acquisitions lie. We've been trying to bring the tribes together, thus these initiatives.
Fantastic. And so this is where I, at Pivotal, joined your story. I was invited and I participated in your touching a team. I'm like, well, that's amazing. And then you tell me what you're really doing. And so we've talked before about how you made the choice to choose CI. Tom Esqueo is going to tell us about how they chose, like, at a top level, how they dealt with executives at a top level. And this call is about how to deal with teams. And so it seemed to me one of the biggest questions that a customer might have is like, okay, well, it sounds great, digital transformation and all these initiatives, but how frequently should I touch teams? What's my overall hygiene to keep program delivery going?
Best thing to think about is whatever business case or whatever funding initiative is actually giving you the permission to adopt PCF and do this project. And then there's going to be immediately some sort of scheduling. You're going to be prioritizing application teams. And that's often, if you're an executive, it's obviously part of your purview, but not done directly by you. But regardless of how you start, it's going to start with some sort of set of dates. It generally framed in the form of a customer cutover, a done date for a given application team. You start with those, work backwards into time. Think 3 months before that date, think 6 months before that date if you have that luxury. About 6 months before, you want to make that initial outreach because things are going to stagger along. You're going to find all sorts of things about the team not knowing why the heck you're reaching out to them. Right. You're going to have to get through context, and that, given the fact that it's probably disparate email correspondence, it's going to take a while to struggle through.
Right.
So you want to set the context and drive towards. Now, we have a center of excellence team called the Cloud Native Enablement Team. They go in first and they try to do what we call work plans, which are relatively detailed design plans of how to transform the application.
Well, great. Let's slow that process down. So, how did that team get on? So it's a funding model. We are going to reform whatever you guys do. A lot of broadcasts, multi-channel broadcasts. Okay, so we're going to update how we send SMS texts to school parents, parents of kids in school. Okay, so so we know we're going to do there. And how many teams would be involved in that whole process?
In a given platform like that, which is one of our larger products, I can think of about 8 to 10 different discrete teams, groups of human beings that worked on one part of the code base.
Okay,
and that's just one platform.
There's finance tied to efficiency. And when we've talked before, that efficiency typically is decommissioning assets and making the process easier to operate.
Definitely the safest way to start, turning things off.
Okay, you got 8 to 10 teams. Your delivery coordinator. So you said you're going to send mails to them very early, but how are they going to know that they should pay attention? Like, oh, what is this mail from Terry Miles who I don't know? Like, what's going to cause them to pay attention?
You're going to hope that their eventual supervisor, the head of a product development organization, has given them some context, but you're not going to count on it. You start out, you just don't. You never do. Yep. So you try to start with something innocent and general, not specific to any agenda of, hey, you've been selected as part of a PCF migration project. Let's talk to you about what that means. Let's figure out what this can mean for you. You're just trying to find out what their value proposition might be, because it's not going to be the same thing as the people who got them into that PCF migration in the first place.
Right. I think you're pointing there to the difference when you're making executive level decisions on finance-based things. that often miss the translation layer to people. So it sounds like what you're talking about is there will be a translation layer, like the why me layer.
Yeah.
And so I hear you're suggesting that that be fairly gentle and broad in the beginning.
There's motivation they have and motivation they inherit. And what you're going to start with is the motivation they inherit, which is their boss is telling them to re-platform to PCF.
Okay, yeah.
Start with that as the reason you're reaching out, but then you're trying to immediately, for long-term process hygiene, you're trying to figure out motivation they have, opportunities they see in the context of that re-platforming. They're customers, and they are coerced generally. They generally have to do this, but it's going to go a lot better if you can find something that they care about.
Yeah, okay. Now I think I finally see. And so I would say in the corporate world, we don't see a lot of people really, specifically going in to meet the demand. What would be useful to the line level person? Okay, so I think that's actually a crux move. If you don't do that, then it is just you being coercive, right? rather than you being cooperative and a partner in the whole thing. Okay, great. And so do you have any, I'm imagining, since you have touched around 60 teams, that there have been some teams who were more resistant. Is there any pattern there? Any tools you pull out of the toolkit when that happens?
Yeah, the most common objection you're going to find, and this is an objection that can work, is the zero-sum game of re-platforming versus the typical product roadmap. So who's actually controlling that team's sprint plans if they're running agile? Who's actually controlling what that group of developers and QA people are going to do the next 2-3 weeks?
Right.
And if they are besieged by other efforts, in our business, it could be that maybe they have just a sales team that really needs something to happen. It could be platform consolidation that isn't even necessarily re-platforming. Mm-hmm. Maybe we're trying to turn 5 services into one and make that one serve multiple verticals.
Yeah.
There's often going to be something else that they'll push back and say, I can't possibly re-platform because I have to do this. Then you get those things shaken loose, and then you just start talking up the chain, because in the end, they have line supervisors. They're probably not the same supervisors you have as that agent of change. And you negotiate, you horse trade from there. You try to find a way to kill it all at once.
Okay, well, we're back to, you said in different interviews, plain old product management, project management skills are critical here. And I want to highlight that for anyone who might watch, because there are many, classic product management or project management has got a bad rap today. But I would say it has a very specific place when you are moving from point A to point B as a known thing. So
I would agree that there's something formal to the discipline of product management that we have an advantage because we have to think about this all the time. But everybody in a business enterprise can feel this pain of you get stuck if you keep talking about a solution. Conversations, especially when they're cross-functional, work better, have better outcomes if you keep reminding yourself of the problem you're trying to solve.
Great.
And it sounds obvious, and it's the kind of thing we're all kind of trained to avoid anyway, and it goes right on up from executives down to analysts. Yeah. But the truth underneath that is that there are multiple ways, multifaceted ways to articulate that problem that can still lead you to a common solution. And that's what you're trying to broker to push this thing along, is to find their version of that problem statement.
Yeah, I love it. In a previous episode, you did say that you hire people who can be arbiters, who can do brokerage, who can negotiate. As you're talking, it just reminds me of the Chris Voss line in his book, Never Split the Difference, that keep in mind that the problem is the problem, not your negotiating party, right? That they are not the problem. The problem is the problem. And that's a fine point worth making. Okay, so we've got those teams. You schedule. There's sometimes laggards, and so you just do the most obvious and straightforward organizational thing for a laggard, no problem. And so of the 8 teams that got change, 4 or 5 are happy to get on the schedule. A few push you off, but I assume you take care of that. So Now, do you do that first interview with all teams? Like, hey, all 8 teams get on that 200-person call you've talked about. Blah blah blah. Here's what we're doing. Whatever, Uh, let's just say that one of our consultants here says you have to air out the plan to let people come and beat on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to put it out in the open and let people attack it. Um, so what's that process? Well, assuming you have a process like that, what's the
Sure.
initial meeting look like?
Two strategies for mass communication. You can use them different ways, different times. One is showcases. You're trying to do broadcast meetings, and generally any company of size has some ongoing emerging technology forum. That might be the first place where you
Got it.
do this. And what you're going to try to do is, um, uh, if it's PCF, you're going to bring pivots to maybe discuss some of the value propositions,
Sure.
or executives. You might try the top-down thing first. You can use that to get it out there. But as quickly as possible, what you're going to try to do is, as an alternative to the showcase and broadcast meetings, might be some sort of chat community. As soon as you can get to a critical mass of people who understand PCF, who have been working their way through, when you're about most of the way, all the way through that initial batch of customer cutovers and migrations of apps, whoever your initial patients are,
Yep.
about the time they're about ready to get through, you have enough human capital for a community of practice. And
Okay.
that's a very old intellectual academic concept. It still rings true as just a great model for human interaction that leads
Yep.
to change. And so you use chat clients, instant messaging clients, to get a lot of people on stage so that you can get questions asked and answered at the same time.
Yep.
Knowing that working in technology too, the type of learners that human beings are, if you take the general population, most of us rate as visual learners. And while that's also true of people who work in technology, there's also a higher percentage of intuitive learners in our ranks. And an intuitive learner means, give me the information that you have. I'm going to go away and make my sense out of it. Even better if I can get my hands on some sort of sandbox and whack
Right.
around for a while.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I'm going to come back to you with the questions I have.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to seed those intuitive learners, because especially the people who are going to make things go for you at the start are dev managers, tech leads, people like that. They're going to be the first people who really make the charge and transform that application.
Right.
Give them the chance for that intuitive learning experience, because those people tend to be very much that way.
Yeah. We've seen one parallel in operations where most operations organizations, they might be large, multi-thousand person operations, but a dozen or so people are who they call when they troubleshoot. And so we find natural pockets of people who you like, well, who are those dozen people? Those are the people that you're attempting to early convince, as opposed to being early adopters. You hope they become early adopters, but and if you can convince them, we find that you can move certainly the operations ball very far.
Our podcast audience here of executives too, they have an advantage where they may be running technology organizations, but they frequently sit in on meetings where there's talk of marketing. And they are acquainted with the practice. And you and I are having a marketing conversation,
right?
Just with a
internal
very specific, internal marketing. And so you're looking for your influencers too at this very early stage. Now, you can call it a center of excellence. You can actually create a dedicated team.
Yeah.
You can send some people for intensive pivotal training and return them back into the wild and let them spread the word. But even more anecdotally, if you can just find initial adopters, people who've played around with PCF, maybe driven an app through, or are driving that first app through a POC stage, get those people in front of the crowd. Let those people, because especially if they're respected by your development community, and even for a large and disparate technology organization like ours, people all over the planet, all these former acquisitions, they know each other more than I would have expected. Teams across verticals, they know of people, even if they haven't had to work directly with them.
They might see their upstream commit, right? They see their name in the upstream commit. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay, great. So the big thing we want to get to is, for the most part, starting these things is starting them, but that's not the real thing. The real thing is the long tail of taking care of these customers. Okay, going back to, school communications. We got 4 teams in the first. If you had you've got to touch 8 teams, what time frame do you want to touch? Half of them, 3/4 of them? Do you structure it like that?
For us, it is a single application team starts with a generic arc, 6 months out, 3 months out.
Okay.
And you have to decide about your own ability to handle throughput based on the number of people that you have at your change team's disposal, the PC program team, and support of adoption. For us, what we've learned is we could take on a lot at once.
Let's see if we could put hard numbers on that. You have how many people in a month you would be willing to touch how many teams?
Okay. The Center of Excellence team, which are, people with development chops who can actually help transform applications and act like a pivotal platform architect, for example, or AppTX specialist.
Yeah.
Guys like that, there are 7 or 8 of them on the team, and you'd be working with one of them at any given time.
Correct. Okay.
And you'd have me, who's more in the change management, enablement, product management piece. Then there's going to be a project manager who helps push the dates along, and ours is very good, has a lot of content expertise, super helpful in this regard.
Yeah.
And so really it's pieces of about 4 or 5 people when I think about it. Partial allocation, team by team, helping them along.
And so,
go ahead.
Well, can you do 2 teams a week? I mean, I'm trying to get just an overall velocity. You look at a 6-month schedule and you're like, I'm very comfortable. We're running along at whatever, a 70% flow rate. Like, what's too little? What's too much?
Our flow rate for the first 3 to 6 months of really trying to make this happen was only about 5 or 6 teams at a time.
Okay.
Then it blew up to dozens of teams at a time. And we could talk about how we got from A to B.
Okay. Let's see. Let's pick that up after let's go back down to, we've got one team. We're going to call it Team Foo. You've gone through the whole thing. They have consulted with someone internally or externally who can do an app transformation or an app re-platform. Let's say they do it on January 1st. When's the next time you want to check in with that team?
About 4 to 6 weeks in. You want to see if they've gotten to a milestone, which could be a very high-level, quick analysis of that application's viability for a PCF migration, or it could be something more detailed, something we call a work plan, which is actually a design document that's meant to be of some fidelity.
Okay, great. Well, do you do a design document every time? Do you allow it to go organically? How do you choose that?
Now, we really want that design document, because something that's probably not unique to us, but worth mentioning is, and we'll probably talk about this on every single episode, but it's never just the app layer. We're talking about the app layer, but there's going to be something else. It could be that networking is messed up, or that the way they're handling DNS is just going to have to completely be rethought as they go to the new platform. Or it could be like, holy moly, you've got that kind of database? I didn't know anybody built one in this century. That you're just going to have all of these conversations. You're going to shake every tree. And so that design document is, and the single most important thing, if you want a concrete picture in your mind, get a context diagram, a data flow diagram as soon as possible in front of people who can evaluate it. Figure out what touches what and what's going to get ripped up when you pull that thing out of its root structure and place it somewhere else. That's what you're trying to do with that initial touch point, is drive out of the bushes those dependencies that are going to be beyond the control of the pivots who are helping you, the program team that's working on PCF, the platform operations team. There's going to be something else you can't control almost every time.
Yeah, that's kind of the at least an upstream and downstream adjacency map.
Yes.
Have you adopted the event storming technique?
No, what is that?
Event storming is basically where you just get the people who have the context. Like, hey, I know that we have this old database. You put them all in a room, and you bring in upstream and downstream adjacent organizations, and then you get long whiteboards and Post-it notes, and you literally just map out, like, I know I have to do a quarterly maintenance on the database, because if I don't, it becomes wonky because it's got too much data in it, right? So I've got to do a data purge. Let's say I'm the one who does it. I'm the only one who knows. right? And I put that on the board, and someone's like, oh, I never knew that happened because I see this problem every quarter, and like they start hooking that up. Eventually, you end up being able to put your stickies into sort of discrete columns. And so that's the event storming. Like, what events cause this whole thing to happen? And that's one, yeah. So that's one of the techniques that Pivotal uses when people say, the people who knew anything about this left 10 years ago, and we've just been praying nothing happens, right? But we can't, hope is not a strategy anymore here. And so they have to break down what that whole thing is. Possibly, it might be in a code base no one at the company can read anymore, right? I mean, so they really have to figure out what's going on. Anyway, that's event storming, and that's one of the tools we like.
Okay, now I can look back and see a missed opportunity. I'll tell you our experience. In initial dojos, platform dojos and app transformation dojos, Pivot's hosting them, we did journey mapping, which would be the path to production, which is sort of a subset of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I can think about how those exercises, which were sticky notes arranged left to right on a timeline all the way to that production release, was meant to help shake some of those objects loose. But I can see now that from there, those upstream and downstream adjacent service discussions tended to happen when they got more cross-functional. They tended to be reactive in relation to a problem that's being escalated. Now, that could be something about our organization's own culture, is that it took the escalation to get the right people an opportunity to just pay attention. Because it's almost never because these people don't want to help you. It's just they got too much to do, and you got to escalate stuff to get in front of their view. But I could see how we missed an opportunity to sort of take some of those journey maps, which were elaborate and very detailed, and bring people in from InfoSec or networking or database administration to take a look at that and think about that bigger picture.
Yeah, for what it's worth, the fundamental view of Pivotal is there's a revolution in developer frameworks and there's a revolution in operations frameworks. But in the middle is security and networking and everyone else, and no one told them about the revolution. No one said, hey, your developer is going to be using 4 to 10 times as many features. What's your plan for keeping up? Anyway, that we could have a whole other chat on that, but frankly, these are the things that we see in digital transformation, is that, as you've said before, it's not technical transformation. You shouldn't do it if you're just after some technical thing, right? If you don't know where your efficiency jump is going to come from after you complete the initial phase, that's why I like your approach. 2 phases. We're going to save money on consolidation, and then we're going to move to a much higher productivity model, higher throughput and all that sort of thing. Anyway, that's where Pivotal sees customers who are succeeding at the 3, 4, 5 year level. They finally hit that, and they hit a productivity, well, they just hit a nice patch of blue ocean where they can make a lot of experiments and they can try out a lot of things, a lot lower effort. Anyway,
sure.
I don't want to digress too far. So 6 weeks in, we're going to touch the initial team.
Yeah.
There is an actual work plan that we're going to measure against in almost all cases. Okay, what happens at the 6 week? Assume that you got 90% of what you wanted in the work plan, that you don't have any real corrections. Okay, so we're at 6 weeks. What do you say to that team, and when do you touch them again?
It's time to turn design into action. And at the earlier stages of our project, it was an easier milestone to cross over because most of the application teams that onboarded came through dojos, intensive engagements where we'd either bring pivots or bring members of our Center of Excellence team to be able to engage. And so it was clear that we would be scheduling travel, and so that just made it relatively easy. Now we're in sort of a, I don't know, moderately mature. I defer to others from Pivotal to sort of assess this better, but we are a moderately mature project now. A majority of our teams are self-enabled as they move their way through. So that particular milestone comes to the sprint plans when they're actually going to get started, pressing them at that point of deciding what's your first act. If in Agile, workflow is what you can expect these teams to have already internalized. You can talk the language of, well, what's that increment? What's that component? What's that demonstrable thing that you feel like you can deliver on your way towards an app transformation?
Right.
You can use that currency with them if you want to, but you're trying to get a sense from them of when are you actually going to start putting fingers to keyboards and getting some of this done, and what people are you going to need to help you actually take that step and pick it up and drag it over.
Let me see if I can do that. So if I'm on the team, I meet with you or a representative, I get a picture, and as we said earlier, you're also working to establish what's valuable for me. So I'm assuming like, yeah, I would definitely love a much shorter push cycle. Like the push cycle now is crazy. So if you can deliver me a push cycle, I actually think my life does get better. That cuts a third of my week sitting around and just makes it go away. Okay, 6 weeks in, you come back and you don't expect them to have to actually migrate a platform at that point. Is that correct? It's kind of how
That's correct. Yeah. What really happens at that stage is once they're kind of active to transform the application, now they're in a project management office, a PMO cycle, where they're starting to attend regular meetings and they have to start notifying. So that formal structure starts to take hold.
I see. Yeah.
That gives a guy like me a chance to attend every one of those routine meetings where dev managers typically show up and report on progress towards the goal. And you start sniffing for problems. You start asking follow-up questions based on what they're telling you. We talk about things like confidence levels. We talk about the types of outreach they have. There's basic generic questions like, hey, what about that data layer? Do you ever figure that thing out?
Right.
You take notes on each team and try to figure out what that bugaboo is going to be. Yeah. And you make them talk about it on the status meetings.
Oh my gosh. Do you have anything like I admit I'm a Dungeons and Dragons dork, and a character sheet? Like when I sit in customers, I realize that I'm sitting with the customer generally has a certain character. Do you have anything like a character sheet for teams? Because it's literally just check marks, like monolith that can be decomposed, monolith that no one knows anything about, microservice that's, really chunky right now and needs to be moved to a better process. There's all these tick marks, like totally crazy data layer.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, these things actually kind of exist. I've been lucky to work on the product side, more the UI side in the past. I've done a lot of work with user experience designers.
Yes.
Those people and marketers often talk about personas for people.
Yes. We like personas, yeah.
Archetypes of customers and users so that you can serve them better. You can do the same thing with apps. There are app archetypes out there, and you listed quite a few of the boxes out there, the combination of flags. And the easiest way to do that is you're gonna want to quickly, knowing that you're going to be wrong the first, second, and third times you do this, you're going to come up with a definition of done for a PCF app migration. There's going to be a basic checklist of things you really would expect them to do. You're going to be wrong because you're going to end up adding things to that checklist.
Sure.
But it's the basics of, redundancy and production, and have you, just all of the things you would assume.
Yeah.
And you get those in a list, and you try to keep it real brief, real actionable, and then plug resources into it. If you just took those and ran those by any one of your dev managers, you'll pretty quickly get to an archetype because of the way they would react to that prompt. Right. You mean I got to be redundant in production?
Right.
And these are like, we have had really sophisticated, smart people ask that question. Then I realized, wow, that DevOps wall's been really high in the past.
Yeah.
Think about how tight that barrier was, how impermeable that barrier was. That's where the archetypes come from. It's just a few basic diagnostic questions that are pretty predictable for any organization.
Okay. All right. Well,
at least at the start.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay. So we're 6 weeks in, and then what's the next touch point? I assume the next touch point, I, as a team member or a team lead, I'm going to have to show some progress toward goal at that point.
Yes. And what we use as a program is, and again, at this point, we're piggybacking on a formal project management paradigm. So we're trying to come up with a definition of done and then a series of statuses that get there. One thing I'd recommend to any business is, you're going to have a production space sitting in a PCF site or Foundry somewhere, but you're also going to have the lower environments too. The way we've done ours is we have dev and test spaces in a dev test Foundry, and then we have stage and prod in a stage prod Foundry.
Makes sense.
So the first time you push an application into dev and test, that's a milestone.
Yeah.
The first time you have something that kind of looks like the solution, you're going to promote on through to stage. That's another milestone.
Okay.
And then the first time you've actually pushed that sucker into stage is another milestone. So, just promotion of the workload might be an easy way to look at it, but you're trying to keep attention on the next immediate milestone, ask questions that are going to get them there, knowing that you're probably going to struggle more for that. And we would use MVP 1, MVP 2 to sort of define some of these statuses. But the biggest thing I would notice, you're trying to push them from, yes, we have pushed an app into PCF versus we have pushed an app that actually represents our transformation ambitions into PCF.
Right.
That's kind of a big hurdle there, and it's often not properly accounted for in the project schedule.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I would actually sit with everyone and push the Will It Connect app.
Yeah.
Here's access to a PCF. We're just going to push this. You can pull it right off of GitHub. Trivial. You're going to get a result. You're going to see that result returning results to you. And that's the workflow modulo getting a service essentially.
It's good for testing those rules of egress too. They have a tactical reason to do it.
We love that tool. We love that tool. Many of our customers use that to prove that their application security groups are properly set over time. So
totally.
Yeah, we love that app. Okay, so how many weeks in do you want to see progress on the actual required transformation?
We want the words they use to change within 3 weekly status meetings. Whoever's showing up at that weekly status meeting, and these are generally quick hitting meetings, they don't have much to say. But if they're not just reporting the same status, but using the same language 2 or 3 times in a row, it tells you that they're stuck in buying time. Yeah. And then you reach out to them right during or right after that meeting and say, hey, anything I can do to help push this thing forward?
Man, I love the straight up intervention strategies. Every one thing you say makes sense. Of course, someone's having a problem, you contact them. But very few people put that together into a long tail process. Okay, so you've got your long tail process there. It's 6 weeks, and within 3 weeks of that, so at week 9, if you don't hear something, then it's time for friendly intervention.
Yes.
But if they hear that language change and you're like, oh, well, I actually did a test migration of our database into a service database over there just to find out if it would work for us. Well, now you're checking a box.
Yes, and a tactic in this area that helps too is if they're binding services or just connecting to a database, push them to, as quickly as possible, test the performance and the connection times. To whatever degree latency is going to be a concern to these people,
right.
Use it as a cudgel and get them to start making PCF prove itself by testing the performance of your initial deployments. And that'll start to shake loose some of these adjacent services, blockers, dependencies, conversations again.
Yeah, and just as a pivotal side note, we want people to not believe us, but to actually do the work and do the evaluation. The nice thing about PCF is that when you do that evaluation, it's relatively stable. Things can change underneath, but that structure that runs your stuff in PCF is not going to be radically different. It's not like some hardware team built you some hardware and it's radically different performance than some other hardware team might do it. PCF has generally a very narrow performance band, which in general is very good, but as you point out, teams do need to build that confidence. That's a significant hurdle. Am I going through all this work to go to? I like to compare a Dyson vacuum with any other vacuum, right? Vacuuming is not worth it without a Dyson because it doesn't work. And so, well, many engineers are like, I'm not going through the pain if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's another one of those points about getting line developers on your side. Is like.
Totally. And also right in here, thinking back to the application archetype discussion we had a moment ago, one of the most obvious red flags that you don't have to worry about because everyone gets nervous about it is if a team is migrating to PCF, maybe they're not just moving to PCF, but maybe they're moving from on-prem to public cloud PCF.
True. Yep.
Or they're going from cloud A to cloud B.
Right.
And those people know to be very worried about every external dependency in relation to that app layer because they just know it.
Yeah.
But the people who are going from on-prem to on-prem PCF, and maybe they only had one production instance, and maybe the failover was manual, but now we're going to geo-redundant, and oh shoot, that service needs to be redundant and available in a high-speed connection to that data center on the other side of the continent.
Yeah.
That's the stuff. That's a red flag for a program team, because it's easy to underestimate those adjacent services if you're on-prem to on-prem PCF.
Yeah, those tend to be hard problems. Hopefully you've got patterns in your org that are working for you, so you can at least if people are not, sailing out alone.
We do. I think as a part of a PCF project, about 9 to 12 months in, you should expect to see positive references, positive examples that generally give some sort of working precedent to almost any app team question. It shouldn't take long to accumulate those.
Awesome. Okay, so we're out to 9 weeks. At 9 weeks, you want to see positive motion. How long is this cycle going to be? Do you ever have terminate touch? We either see what we need to see in the field and we can stop scheduling with these folks, or is it just an ongoing process year over year to schedule with folks that you've touched?
Never stop talking with them until that app is done, and don't stop talking to them when it's done. Schedule another touch point, maybe a month or 3 months after too, because there's often going to be some next level considerations. Maybe they got into PCF, but they weren't able to take advantage of auto scaling. What's it going to take to get there? Now, do you see the point of auto scaling now that you're in?
I see. And this also has, because the platform does ship new features, some of which are significant, like very easy blue-green deploy and weighted routing and things like that. These are things that help with the long tail of DevOps and SRE. And so, okay, great. And that just fits in with your program delivery models. The organization could make decisions about program to deliver, and you could touch all those things. Okay, that makes tons of sense. Is there anything else to say about that process? If I'm a non-Google company and I want to think about doing this process, what else would I want to know?
We are very lucky. You'll hear me say this in every episode. I've got great supervision. I've got some really smart executives who do prioritize change and managing change.
Awesome.
As a skill set. And one thing but this would come to a lot of executives. I would just want to emphasize the importance of it is think about how blockers, dependencies, and issues that application teams expressed are often going to be articulated in the form of, we don't have enough people to get all of these things done. And in advance, think about how you can arbitrate that and equip your executive sponsor and on down to the people who are actually, have some sort of budgetary control. That could be in our business. That's going to be people at the VP level running our product development, software quality assurance organizations, our ops organizations. It's also going to be our VP of portfolio delivery, who has a budget that guides the actual program of adopting PCF. Yep. But those people with budgetary authority, prepare them for labor arbitrage that might not mean a straight shot either, where, okay, we need this particular human being named Fred to help us transform this application, but Fred's busy in 5 different places. Yeah. Is there a way that you can hire resources that might go over to application D so that you can slide teams from D to C, C to B, B to A, but get ready for that labor arbitrage, because it doesn't just get you across the finish line, but it also, it disseminates the idea of change and the opportunity of platforming across the organization more quickly. And I know that every one of those application teams we've ever given a troop surge to has greatly appreciated. They generally killed it once we got them into a spot where they feel like they could deliver.
Yeah, I don't know how to put a finer point on this one, but one person who knows what they're doing will fundamentally transform a recalcitrant team in like a day.
Yeah, totally.
it's a shocking thing to watch. And I will tell you I have a perfectionist kind of point of view, and I have to manage my own response to a team that one person can make a difference on after weeks of wrangling like that. What to get prepared for, like the kind of human challenge. That's a human challenge that I go through at the team level here. The flip side is once you realize those people were just concerned because no one had explained the whole thing to them and not shown them what the platform looks like beginning to end and things like that, and they're just they have the natural avoidance of investment. They have no idea what the outcome is, and so
totally.
All right. Well, there's one other thing that you have done with training that I find really remarkable, and that is for the dojos that you bought from Pivotal, you sent staff to every single one of those that was not the target of the dojo. So will you tell me a bit about that process?
Yeah, it's a ride-along plan, basically. We know that there's two types of competencies these people need to transform applications to PCF. And there's a design competency that often chronologically happens pretty early on, but then gets validated, tested, done all over again when you're transforming. But then there's and it relates to the confidence that team member that can really stir the drink, when he or she shows up. There's confidence has tremendous value if a developer knows that they're sitting next to someone who can tell them how to SSH in here. Right. As opposed to there, just the things that might be apparent in the documentation, but you'd have to go through it. Yeah. You can just ask a guy that's going to help you move faster. Right. Because developers are very aware of the fact that there's value creating activity and non-value creating activity. They are acutely aware of it all the time. Yeah. And they're going to feel like, oh, I'm doing stuff. I'm actually making this happen, and I'm learning something that's going to be useful for me later on. So that's the tactical engagement of the ride-alongs. They get to sort of see that happening. They get to hear conversations about how to tactically just manage working on something.
Yeah. And so in the dojos, did you send team members from your team or from the Center of Excellence to sit in the dojos?
Center of Excellence, always, whenever we could. And then adjacent team members, people who might be scheduled to come up sooner. Also people who are just physically in the same office space.
Okay. Yeah. And so from an executive perspective, if you're looking, you're looking at a contract, there's all of these services, this thing called a dojo. Some of them are long. Some of them, the initial dojo can be 6 weeks long. And so if you're an executive and you're looking at all of that, I just thought it was a great innovation for you guys to say, hey, we're going to take advantage of every dollar we're going to spend. We think we'll get the value, yes, but then we're going to do extra work to make sure that we can move that value forward alone. And Pivotal is all happy with that, right? If we scheduled 10 dojos with you and after 5 you're like, we got it, we would think we had succeeded there. Our goal is to have your culture get established this way. So
direct advice to anyone considering PCF, and we've said it at other events, buy as many dojos as you can afford, then try to buy a couple more, because it's the culture change is best done by people that don't work for the same company where the culture needs to be changed. It is just a fact of human business professional behavior that you're going to buy it if it comes from somebody from the outside, because they don't have the same agendas that people in your company might have. And
yeah, that's great. There you go. Cancel your grad school application. And just know this particular fact. Okay, well certainly we have a point of view on that. That's why we do lots of consulting in our labs, because we think that culture transfer. But I had never put together that actually has to do with who's motivated for what. And
Pivotal is opinionated, and Pivotal is dogmatic in many respects. But and one that I firmly believe in is they insist on pairing. I have seen them get personally cranky if they are not allowed to pair with people when they're there on site. And that pairing discipline is a concept many people understand. But if you're coming from the outside, and if you're really insisting on it because Pivotal just believes in it, it's more likely to actually happen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, fantastic. Let's see. We've got about 3 minutes. Let's just see if we can do a super quick wrap up. When you're going to typically identify a team that is, you're looking for a certain goal, either elimination of data center assets to move to public cloud or some financial thing that you're looking for initially. You're going to touch each one of the teams. There's going to be a 6-week, it sounds like a mingle and get to know you and like, here's what's available. And like everything is, prepare for a climb, but it's not going to be for, 6 weeks. And we're going to talk with everyone about getting it in backlogs and stuff like that. And then at 6 weeks, you're looking for that climb to start. And at 9, 10 weeks, you're looking for results toward that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Triage, design. And you're designing to a point where you shake free the external dependencies that are really going to be the bedeviler of most of your app transformation projects.
Right.
You're moving from design into kinesis. When are you actually going to get going?
Design to kinesis. Okay, I like this.
Yeah.
That's a new concept. So at 6 weeks is that transition point, and 3 more weeks is where you want to see results. And so we're at the 9-week mark. What is the average? Hey, we were a team that started on January 1st. What's the date typically that we're going to land on PCF with a better data service, better scaling? All of the kinds of things that you run into.
Design run times vary greatly. I'll choose 3 months arbitrarily, but it is more consistent once you actually get to kinesis. Your dojo begins from your date of your, and we actually do visualizations in this company to show the amount of time that passed from day 1 of your dojo to when you cut over customer traffic.
Wow.
We've got scatter plots.
Yeah.
We'll show people.
Yeah. I mean, you're managing this. Like this is once again, most places do not have what you do, which you call program delivery. Mm-hmm. Intrato has a program delivery organization, and I've just never seen it. That's why we're having this conversation. Okay. And so that organization is managing, like classic. If you want to manage something, measure it and just ask yourself, did we meet it, right?
And real kinesis to done's about 3 months. That's pretty solid. I mean, there might be things that create that long tail. You might have to talk a customer off the ledge before you do your client engagement, release coordination stuff. Lots of things can come up, but generally 3 months from really getting going to being done.
Okay, so if you're a leader doing this and you set up all the right stuff, right? You have to hire staff. You have to make sure the program delivery team knows what they are going to deliver, has some model. But it is possible to structure that for a 3-ish month delivery. And I'm assuming that at 6 months, you either say this team is, they did come along, or there's some other major structural thing that is going to be more challenging.
Yep. And then the podcast, I mean, this is a whole nother episode, but a quick note I drop in here is think about how you can stagger the schedules. Think about how you can do the dates with teams that know each other pretty well, especially if they live in the same city. Yep. See if you can get them about 6 weeks apart so that they can sort of see somebody go right before them and they can pay it forward too when they're done.
Awesome. Terry Miles of Intrato, always illuminating. Thank you so much for the time. And we'll see you for the next episode.
Special shout out to all the pivots who help us along the way too. You're one of them, Tony. I can name about 10 or 12 guys that have done a heck of a lot for us. And
we love doing it. Thank you for your trust. I mean, thank you.
Absolutely, man. Take care.
All right. See ya.